Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. I am visiting with my good friend Tim Knox from Rebound Realty. Hey, Tim. How you doing?
Doing good, buddy. How are you?
Well, I'm upright and walking around, so I will not complain.
You're vertical, therefore you're okay.
That's right. I'm on the right side of the grass, as somebody used to say all the time. There's a couple of things I want to get to in just a couple of minutes here. Try not to make this too long because you and I could go for a long time.
We do. By the way,
Uh,
my dogs are walking around in here, so if you see Murphy's big head come by, you'll know what's going on.
One of the things I've talked about a lot on the update is that there are some things that dealing with this virus has changed that for the better, right? And one of them is that we do a lot more videos and we have a lot more grace with dogs barking and
Yeah.
maybe not toilets flushing yet. We're probably not there yet, but I think it'll be okay if Murph comes through. So.
Yeah, I think he's okay. Buddy's the wild card. We call him Rain Man because you never know what he's going to do. He can be fine one minute and howling at the moon the next. So, but they're good boys. They're both passed out over here in the studio.
All right. Well, good. Well, hey, look, I mentioned you're with Rebound Realty, and I do want to talk about housing, real estate in a minute, but let's talk about you're also a small business owner and have been through several iterations of businesses, as have I. And there's a lot of concern, a lot of chatter going on right now about reopening, about getting back to work, getting back to business. And a lot of the commentary deals with unemployment and kind of where we are. It's almost like the way that they've displayed, the news has displayed the number of coronavirus cases on this hockey stick graph. They're starting to do that with unemployment also. What are you, just general sentiments about where we are with employment, and then we'll talk about how we get back.
Well, I mean, you and I both know just by the very nature of this thing, the unemployment rate is high.
Right.
Because people were forced to stay home and apply for unemployment. And the chatter that I hear is, oh my gosh, how long is this unemployment going to last? You know, what is the rate that we're going to hit and how many years is it going to take to recover? And, you know, my thing with this, and I was looking up some information yesterday because I knew we were going to chat about this. If you look at what the major institutions are forecasting, and then you compare that to how long they think it will take us to recover, it's really a stark difference between now and the Great Depression. And, you know, that's what I keep hearing. Okay, we're going into the next Great Depression. It's going to be a decade before we are back to normal. I don't believe that. I think we're going to boom back pretty quickly. But just to quote some numbers, major institutions forecasting unemployment rates last seen during the Great Depression, meaning we may hit those rates, but we're going to come back a lot sooner. Goldman Sachs is predicting 15% unemployment before this thing is over. Merrill Lynch, 10.6, JP Morgan, 8.5, Wells Fargo, 7.3. So the rate of unemployment, Tom, is going to increase. It has to, simply because of the number of people out of work and applying for benefits. Now, one of the questions I have is how many of those folks applying are really qualified to get them and may. You know what I mean? Because a lot of, for example, like I haven't paid into the unemployment system in 30 years. So I could not get standard unemployment. I might be eligible for, you know, the COVID benefits that they're putting out, but it's really questionable. So, you know, I think the interest, when you look at that rate, you got to have to take it with a grain of salt. But again, the key is how long is it going to take us to bounce back? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes a lot of sense. And there are a lot of factors at play. One of the things that we encouraged employers to do early on was, as this thing was beginning, everyone was doing their best to hold on to their employees and try to keep their employees employed. And look, at some point, you have to be more concerned about surviving than you do keeping all the employees hired. And so one of the things that we told them was, look, if you have to lay them off, let them get unemployment.
Yeah.
If you have to reduce their hours, let them get unemployment to make up the difference. So there's a difference between the types of people who are seeking that unemployment insurance right now than say what we saw after the housing crisis in 08, 09. That was true. The jobs aren't there, unemployment.
Yeah. Well, if you look at, there's a graph. In fact, I'll share this graph with you that they put out. The number of years it took for the unemployment rate to return to the pre-crisis level back during the Great Depression. Yeah, 1929 to 1942. It took 12 years for the unemployment rate to get back down to where it was pre-crisis. Now, a lot of that has to do with the banks failing, the businesses failing. There just were no jobs to be had. So jobs don't come back until business comes back. You know what I mean? There has to be someone to employ those people for that rate to decline. If you look at the thing that I keep hearing comparisons to is the Great Recession. And that was 2006 to about 2015, 16. It took about 9 years for employment to come back. And that's part of that housing crisis that you're talking about is people were losing jobs. It was kind of a different thing than it is now. I just did a video that we're not in a housing crisis, we're in a health crisis. So you really can't predict things are going to take as long as they do. But, one of the points you made, and you and I both been in this situation, we have had to lay off workers. Hell, we've had to fire workers, And so, but the point is this, if the business does not survive, there's no one to employ them. And I hear, I've heard a lot of people complain about, well, they laid everybody off or they're not paying their workers. These complaints are coming from people who've never had to make payroll in their life. You and I have. I mean, I look back at, years ago, I was in the retail business when those tornadoes came through, knocked out the power grid. We were shut down for 2 weeks. I laid everybody off. I had no choice because my goal was to keep the business alive. And if the business survived, then we can talk about coming back to work. So it just kind of, I think people need to realize the situation that we're in now. It is a little different. We're not going to see, 5 to 10 years to get the unemployment rate. I honestly, maybe I'm over optimistic, Tom, but I think it's going to come back pretty darn quickly. Once we get back to work, people are aching to get back out there and go to work.
Well, I mean, here's an important point to remember, though. The Great Depression and the Great Recession were both caused by structural defects in our economy. Mm-hmm. And it was those structural defects that caused it to take so long to recover from that. This is more of a black swan event, more like a 9/11 type event, where it's something that's going to swoop in, cause a significant disruption, but structurally we are sound. And think about this. I mean, we were flirting with a 2% unemployment number before all this started. What if we'd been just up around to 8%, 7-8% already? We'd be well past 15% at this point. The other big difference is with these stimulus checks, and it's something that I've been talking about the last couple of days. That money is hitting people's bank accounts right now. And as a country, we're notoriously bad at saving. And the intent of these...
We're great at spending.
We're great at spending. And that's the purpose of these checks and deposits. If the local business is not open for me to spend that money on, I'm going to spend it somewhere, and it's probably going to be online.
Yeah. What are you hearing from your clients, the small business folks that did have to lay people off? Do they have a plan for when they're going to start bringing people back? I would assume that this is kind of going to be a gradual process.
Yeah, well, everything that we've seen is the indications are that the loosening of the restrictions will be gradual. There'll be a lot of monitoring to make sure that we're not, for the course of 6 weeks to 2 months, we'll be back to 100% open. Now, I've talked with most of our clients are in good shape. I've talked with lots of business owners who run the gamut of being in good shape to they're out looking for jobs, because there's just no money coming in. They don't really have a good structural plan in place to respond to something like this. And you and I both know the reality is, just like with the tornadoes, I can do everything right in my business, but when something like the tornadoes or ice storm or virus comes through and it tilts the field one direction or the other, I'm forced to respond to that. And I might not, if I'm not prepared, I might not be able to survive. And it's through no fault of how I'm running the business. It's because I don't have a good plan.
What lessons do you see coming out of this going forward that most small business people or even big business people should learn? I mean, I mean, you can only be so prepared, right?
Yeah, I think the big thing is have a plan B and maybe even a plan C, right? I just had a conversation with a business owner, and we were just doing an asset inventory. It's like, what assets do you have? How can we leverage these to create income for you in a different way? You know, I talk about the house painter who's got ladders and brushes and poles, and okay, well, you can't get in the house, but what else can you do with those? You know, is there a way that you can support what's going on right now? So, like, you know, Uber's not, for example, they're not doing a ton of their regular level of business, but their food delivery is blowing and going. Right. So it's about thinking about your assets in a way to solve your customer's problem in a new way. And by thinking through that ahead of time, you have the opportunity to build some confidence and to have a plan in place. So when you see those market indicators saying the field is starting to tilt, then okay, well, we need to implement plan B. Here you go. You know, and then you're ready. You're not, because, you know, if you don't have it ahead of time, you're just responding to the fire that's hottest, and that breeds chaos and doesn't lend itself to success.
By our very nature, entrepreneurs we're visionaries, we're opportunistic, but we're not great at planning for the unexpected. And a lot of small businesses, and I was the same way in a lot of my businesses. I mean, we were razor thin on the margins, and I mean, if we missed, you know, a week of no revenue would put a lot of companies out of business. And and so, you know, you and I talked about the insurance that you could get. It's like disaster, whatever. Business, what's it called? Business?
Well, there's several, but the EIDL loans, the emergency impact disaster loans from the SBA.
Well, no, there was actually an insurance policy, business disruption.
Oh, the business disruption insurance.
Yeah, it turns out that doesn't cover disease or act of God in most cases. So that would have kind of left us out in the dark. But again, I guess my bottom line is, you know, we're going to get back to work. It's a gradual process, but I don't think it's going to take 9 to 12 years. I think a lot of folks just like to put out negative stuff just to see how idiots like me will react to it.
Well, now I've also seen a report from Goldman that says they expect the GDP to take a huge hit in the second quarter, maybe down as much as 24%. But the third quarter, they expect it to be a positive 12%. That's a 36-point swing between the second and third quarter. Yeah. And I actually expect the third quarter to be higher, the GDP to be higher than in the fourth quarter where Christmas resides.
Yeah.
So I think what they see and what they are interpreting the recovery is that there's a lot of pent-up potential. There's a lot of back pressure building in the system. And when those valves begin to open, it's going to start rushing out. Yeah. And as a business owner, we just need to be there and be prepared to receive that gift when it shows up.
Yep, I agree.
What? So talk to us a little in the housing market. I know you did a video recently about that, but you know, before all this started, especially here in the Huntsville-Madison area, we had a ton of people moving in. We had a lot of, I mean, you could sell houses without even putting a sign up in the yard. What's going on now with real estate?
You know, very little has actually changed. I mean, as far as my business goes, the difference we're seeing now is there's not as many people listing their homes, really, and that makes sense because people don't want people wandering through their houses and that sort of thing. So the listings are down, but the buyers, I mean, I just ran the numbers this morning for our first quarter, and we are on track to at least match what we did last year. Okay. So even with that, with this coronavirus, our numbers have held up. The difference is most of that revenue came from buyers rather than sellers. So that is the big difference. You know, before this started, we're at a 20-year low in inventory. Interest rates were super low. And now granted, we're a little different than most of the country. You know, we are a very unusual market, but you know, even before this started, people were talking about this housing crisis that was coming, that it was another bubble that was going to bust. But, you know, again, I may be overly optimistic, but I don't think we're in a housing crisis. We're in a health crisis. And I did a whole video about this yesterday, where you cannot compare what is happening today with the housing market to what happened, you know, in 2008 with the Great Recession. It's just everything is completely different. You know, the appreciation back then was just runaway. You know, you could have a house you could buy for $100,000 today, and in 2 months it might be worth $200,000. It was just ridiculous, the inflated appreciation. The other thing back then was how easy it was to get loans. You know, I mean, you remember this. You could, if you had a heartbeat, and it didn't even have to be a strong heartbeat, you could basically get a mortgage. And so that was, you know, you had these predatory lenders, you had people qualifying and getting money that really should not have. And so that was a big factor to it. And because of that, people were refinancing their house and pulling all the equity out. And so what was happening was people were getting dirt cheap mortgages. They were pulling all the equity out of the house. And when you have no equity in the house, it makes it pretty easy to walk away.
Right.
And so
well,
if you look at that, it's very different.
That's what I was talking about. Yeah, that's what I was talking about a few minutes ago. There were just structural defects in the system.
Correct.
Right. And, you know, our housing boom, I'll go ahead and call it a boom, the housing boom that we've been experiencing, especially in this area. One is there's a ton of people moving in, but two, there's income. I mean, there's actual money in the economy. These people have real money that they're spending on real houses. It's not this inflated value that you were describing, and these kind of propped up products that allowed people to get in over their head. I mean, these people are actually legit being able to afford these houses that they're buying. So that's the opposite of a bubble, right?
Yeah. Well, it is. And I think the big thing was money was so easy to get that, I mean, there was I think one of the more well-known stories was a cocktail waitress in Miami who owned like $5 million houses. You know, she had mortgages that were like $35,000 a month, which is probably more than she made in a year. So I think it's the availability of easy money. Because if you go to most people, Tom, and say, "Hey, I'm gonna loan you $200,000 to buy a house, whether you can afford it or not. Do you want it?" Sure.
Yeah, I'll take it. Sure.
But yeah, nowadays though, with our market here especially, you know, we've got one of the more affluent buyer markets in the country, simply because the median household income here is high. But you know, when it's harder to get a mortgage, you have to have a certain credit score. You have to be able to put X number of dollars down. You know, people now getting mortgages should be able to pay for them. And so I'm not saying there's not going to be a housing crisis elsewhere, but in our market, it's still red hot. And again, I'm very optimistic. I think when we are given the okay to go back to our new normal, we are going to see real estate just boom. I know we've gotten five or six new listings in the last week. So I think things are coming back. I'm very optimistic.
Well, good. Me too. Tim, where can people find you and find out more about what you've got going on?
They can go to our website, revolved.com. I am all over Facebook. You can just search for Tim Knox or Revolved. You can give me a call, 679-0704. We work with buyers, sellers, investors, you name it. If it has to do with real estate, we are there for you. How can they get in touch with you, Tom?
how they get to me, mine's really difficult. TomRigsby.com.
There you go.
That's home base for me.
Hey man, I appreciate you having me. I like switching the microphones every now and then.
Hey, I tell people sometimes it's much easier to be on the interviewee side of the microphone.
Well, what's
So I
funny
enjoy
about
doing that too.
you and me is we end up interviewing each other regardless of who hits the record button. So
that's right.
All right, buddy.
All right. Appreciate you, buddy. We'll talk again soon. Okay.
Take care.